As you can see, I'm somewhat short-sighted, but I've been to the optician, and now I have a prescription for glasses, so I can see you all clearly. But we're told that hindsight has 20/20 vision, that it's easy for us to be wise after the event. But the truth is, we're actually blind as to why we err. So my question for today is there a prescription for blind hindsight? I used to work in central London, and when I first started working there, I developed a habit early on. Shortly after the canteen would open, I would dive in looking for my morning fix of caffeine, and I would walk up to the coffee machine, press the button for a large Americano, wait for it to be made, pay, and head back to my office to wake up in peace. About 6 weeks later, I was asked if I would spend the day at the organisation's South London office. So I headed off early morning through the worst of the London rush hour, but I arrived on time and I was pleased to find the same catering company, the same coffee machine. You can see my priorities. So I walked up to the machine and I pressed the button and stood there confused and a bit annoyed as it proceeded to make me half a cup of milky coffee. My mistake. Same coffee machine, different control panel layout. So did I go and speak to the counter staff looking to correct my error and get my large Americano? Of course not, I'm British. I quietly paid and went off to meet my colleagues drinking my small milky coffee. But in human error terms, this is what we call a strong habit intrusion. You see, I'd learned the task so well that I was no longer taking in the clear visual information that was available for me to make the right choice. And in industry, there are a litany of examples of just this happening with disastrous consequences. Now, the American accident investigator, Don Holmstrom, says that no one turns up to work planning to make a mistake. And we can see this is true, but it was a bold statement, considering at the time he was investigating this, the aftermath of the Texas City refinery explosion. 15 people died and 180 people were injured after a group of well-meaning employees turned up to work to restart the plant following maintenance. They took decisions based on their knowledge and understanding of the plant, and disaster resulted. So why is it that our learned behaviours are so strong? So I'd ask you to think back to when you learned to drive a car. You're sitting there nervously behind the steering wheel, and you're asked to change gear for the first time. So all you're having to do is stitch together some fairly fine motor skills, together with, well, not hitting anything with the car. We're operating here at the level of knowledge. We've been told and shown what to do, but we're using our conscious mind to work through the problem and control our actions. And this is inefficient and clunky, because I'm sure when you first changed gear, it wasn't a smooth automatic experience. I'm pretty sure the car protested some. And because this is inefficient, our mind starts to store the knowledge. And we store away a thing called a rule, or in psychological terms, a schema. It's a packet of information or a file in the filing cabinet in your mind. So if I were to ask you, who said the following wartime quote? The lamps are going out all over Europe, and we shall not see them lit again in our lifetime. Any ideas? How about show of hands for Churchill? For those of you who did come up with Churchill, this is a strong but wrong response. You see, I primed you that it was a wartime quote, and you head off into your mind looking for an answer. And when you do that, something interesting happens, because the information we use most often comes to mind most readily. And we call this frequency gambling. It's one aspect of how internet search engines and speech recognition software works. So it was actually Edward Grey, the foreign minister before the First World War, who said that. But also when we have that information come to mind, something else interesting happens. We've been taught from an early age that being right is good and wrong is bad. So when an answer to a problem comes to mind and it seems plausible, we start to hang on to it, and we'll stop looking for another answer. We'll dismiss contradictory information. And this is called confirmation bias, and it's a powerful psychological driver. You only need to take a look at history and see how difficult it was for Galileo to convince the world that we went round the sun and not the other way round. And you can see how strong a psychological motivator confirmation bias is. So back to learning to drive the car. Now, when you change gear, it's a skilled response. It's a smooth, automatic operation. Now, this has clear advantages, because you can now do other things as well as operating the car, like watching where you're going and planning your route. So I take heart from this. This is evidence that even men can multitask. But because there's no conscious control of our behavior, unless our conscious mind notices that something's wrong, our errors lie undetected. So in my case, I get the wrong type and size of coffee. Or perhaps in an unfamiliar car, just when you need it, you select the wrong controls. And our memory is certainly fallible. It's contributing to our problems. Our long-term memory is a huge store of knowledge, bigger than we will ever need. And you can all probably remember your first teacher with ease, but to recall the first 5 would be very difficult. But I'm specifically interested in working memory. This is our mental scratch pad. It allows us to make sense of the information that's around us in light of our current goals. Now, these aren't goals as in what you're doing this weekend or perhaps what you're planning to do with your career. This is more, I need to open that door, or I'd like that coffee. Coffee again. So people with a strong and high capacity working memory, they're good storytellers, and they can reason and write and debate at a very high level. And you'll be glad to know you can't turn your working memory off. If we did that, we'd call that a coma. So I think most of us are doing okay this afternoon. So I'd like you to engage with me in a little test of your working memory. I'd like you to remember just for a minute the following 5 words. And they are tree, chocolate, shirt, electron, and goat. So whilst you're holding those in your mind, if you could just shout out the answer to 167 times 7. I'll let you off. Now, if you could recite out the last 5 letters of the alphabet in reverse order. It's not easy, is it? Okay, finally, if you could raise your non-dominant hand in the air, and use it to count to 10 with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now put your hands up if you think you could confidently shout out the 5 words that I gave you just a minute ago. A few, yeah. So you can see that our ability to hold things in our working memory varies immensely. And also it's very sensitive to interruption. So if I were now to ask you to remember more information, much more information, what would happen is information overload. It would start to take us a lot longer to be able to make sense of that information and make decisions. So if I were to put you in an environment like this, a power station control room, where there's a lot of information available, and the situation were to start to move quite rapidly, what would happen is, unconsciously, you would rely on your skills. And if they weren't working, your mind would head off and look for some of these rules or schema. And only when your conscious mind realizes that your actions aren't helping will you use your conscious mind and your problem-solving abilities together with your knowledge. But if I now add to the situation a bit of confirmation bias and a bit of frequency gambling, we can see very quickly how we might make mistakes. But it's often the situation itself that puts us in a bind. On the railway network, it used to be thought that if a driver passed a signal at danger, that was their fault, and they clearly needed retrained or punished. But being right is good, and wrong is bad, so we can see how we might make that conclusion. When they actually looked at the signals in relation to errors, instead of looking at the drivers, they found that 93% of the signals were error-free, and that 1% of the signals gave rise to 30% of the errors. It's not the driver that's causing the problem, it's the system in which he finds himself in. Because the system we find ourselves in is the antecedent to our observed behaviors. So no one plans to make a mistake, but we do. And it's worth knowing that knowledge of human error is not new. St. Augustine wrote, "Fallor ergo sum," I err, therefore I am, 1,200 years before Descartes would write, "I think, therefore I am." So we need to understand why we err and change to make it less likely. So I asked if there was a prescription for blind hindsight, and it's twofold. If you find yourself having to undertake a complex task, use a checklist. Now, I've been told to my face that a checklist is too simple a solution, that it's beneath the skills and intelligence of the person that I was talking to. But if you chose to use a checklist, it would take you through a complex task one step at a time, without missing anything, repeating anything, or transposing steps. And you'd be in good company if you chose to do this. Some of the most skilled and intelligent people in the world use checklists. Astronauts, surgeons, anaesthetists, pilots. Do not trust their memory when it really matters. And the second part of my prescription comes in the form of a challenge, because you now know that it's not necessarily the human that's responsible for the error. So we have to change what it is we're doing, otherwise we are destined to do the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And that's one definition of insanity. So when you come across human error in all its forms, whether in person or on the news, ask yourself, what was it that caused the human to err? And what do we need to change so that next time we have a better and more successful outcome? Thank you.